The La-174 is one of the rarest jets in War Thunder. Let's check it out. Immediately after World War II, there was a bit of a scramble by the major powers to get new jet-powered aircraft into operational military service as quickly as possible. Advances came pretty fast in the late 1940s, and some prototype designs were actually obsolete by the first time they flew. The Lavochkin Design Bureau in the Soviet Union developed no less than 4 different jet designs in between 1945 and 1949, with the first 2 being relatively basic straight-wing designs, and the latter having swept wings incorporating new aerodynamic research. The La-168 was built around the Rolls-Royce Nene engine imported from the UK, with an expectation that a Soviet copy would soon be available. It was a high-wing fighter with a T-tail, but it had a wide cross-section in order to fit the intended engine. A slightly scaled-down version of the exact same design was built as the La-174, which used the Rolls-Royce Derwent engine, which was later copied as the Klimov RD-500. The La-174 had some problems, which isn't surprising for a first-generation prototype jet fighter, and it crashed after only a couple of test flights. The second prototype, called the La-174D, was improved significantly and featured a more rigid structure and some minor aerodynamic tweaks. The 174D was generally considered satisfactory and ordered into serial production as the La-15. At the time, the La-15 and the MiG-15 were both competing for the exact same government contract, and both of them were ordered into limited production due to the rush just to get any new jets into service. The La-15 was more maneuverable than the MiG, with a similar top speed, and the pilots generally considered it to be the better of the 2 fighters. However, the MiG Bureau had far better logistical infrastructure in place, more experienced factory workers, and the MiG-15 was physically tougher. This made the MiG cheaper to operate and easier to station at unprepared airstrips, which was seen as important for a theoretical World War III scenario. Only about 230 La-15s were built, and they only flew operationally until 1953. What we get in War Thunder is the La-174. This is a jet fighter in rank 5 of the Soviet air tree with a battle rating of 8.0. The 174 is one of the rarest jets in the game, and it's only been available 2 times, back in 2014 and 2017. You can find it on the marketplace, and it's possible that it might be back for some anniversary event sometime in the future as well, but for now, this jet is crazy rare. Being a jet fighter from the 1940s, the La-174 doesn't have any advanced combat systems. Its armament is a set of 3 23mm NR-23 cannons with 100 rounds per gun. It's worth noting that as of making this review, the NR-23 cannons still suffer badly from the dreaded reel shatter mechanic. I personally find this set of guns to be incredibly difficult to aim. My shooting instincts are just dead wrong for these things most of the time, and they're not very accurate to begin with, so please forgive all the missed shots in the footage. The ammo belts give you a choice between a default belt, an armored targets belt, an air targets belt, and a stealth belt. Until and unless they dramatically change the reel shatter system, I'm gonna suggest the stealth belt or the armored targets belt with the NR-23 cannon. The explosive shells in the air targets belt never seem to do any significant damage with this gun, even on direct fuselage hits and even after some of the recent reel shatter patches, and really I've had better luck relying on the armored targets belt penetrating through critical areas. The stealth belt is a good choice if you can aim these guns blind. I usually can't, so the armored targets belt is my personal choice. Being a small, light, dedicated jet fighter prototype, the La-174 doesn't have any external weapons. The flight performance of the La-174 is quite good for its battle rating, with some great advantages, but also a few critical flaws. First and foremost, the jet's rip speed is around 970 km an hour, depending on altitude, and it can absolutely accelerate to rip its wings off in level flight. When you get the speed warning flashing up, don't ignore it in this jet. The second major problem is that the controls lock up really bad at high speeds, and above 800 or so, the jet becomes incredibly difficult to control. These combine to give this jet really fragile dive performance, and you have to be very careful if you're trying boom and zoom vulture tactics or diving into a furball from above. It's also worth mentioning that the air brake isn't great, but that's a pretty minor issue. That's the bad news. The good news is that this jet accelerates quite well towards the medium and low ends of its speed range, it climbs pretty good, and it has decent medium speed energy retention. The thrust-to-weight ratio is above average for a subsonic gunslinger jet, and the La-174 is very strong in vertical maneuvers. If you're even moderately careful, it's very difficult to get energy trapped in this thing. Speaking of which, the dogfighting agility is pretty good. The sweet spot for agility seems to be right around 620 kilometers an hour, and if you can keep it there, this plane can hold its own against almost anything in its BR range in a one-on-one fight. It does okay in rate fights, but it struggles sometimes in horizontal scissors. The good energy retention and wimpy air brake combine to make it hard not to overtake an opponent flying scissors on you. So if you get sucked into that nonsense, you should immediately crank the throttle and go vertical for a yo-yo. Speaking of the throttle, this jet can push to 112, but doing so is going to overheat the engine pretty quick, so be careful. Out in air battles, this jet does reasonably well in pretty much any kind of mission profile. You can climb and hope to intercept bombers, you can stay low and go for strike aircraft, focus on medium altitude dogfighting, pretty much whatever. Except that you need to keep this jet's delicate dive performance in mind. If you go high and you find yourself in a position to dive in on someone, be very careful with managing the throttle and air brake to avoid your controls locking up or your wings ripping off. Spiral dives are going to be preferable to straight vertical dives whenever possible. Now, it's worth pointing out that while this jet does quite well in most one-on-one dogfights, you really need to avoid getting dogpiled. Even a 2-on-1 can be a serious problem, as this plane is actually really fragile and it doesn't take hits very well. Even minor damage from low-caliber machine guns is usually going to kill your flight performance in some way, then it's just a matter of time before the dogpile eventually sends you down. I also want to take another moment to call out the NR-23 cannons on this thing. They have a high cyclic rate, and you'll run out of ammo very quickly if you aren't disciplined with your shooting, and if you have trouble aiming these things like I do, then you may find yourself running out of ammo after just a couple of kills. Personally, I had a really hard time getting more than 2 or 3 kills per match with this jet, and it was entirely because of the combination of just not being a sniper and the somewhat low ammo count of 100 rounds per gun. If you're better at aiming these things though, it might not be as rough. In terms of ground attack, this is one of the light gunslinger jets that, in my opinion, just doesn't have a role for ground pounding. Its ammo belts can't take out even medium ground targets, and without a lot more ammo for repeated shots, this thing just isn't a reliable ground pounder. With the ground targets belt, you can occasionally take out light vehicles in close air support or AI ground targets in air battles, but really just stick to air combat. Visually, this is a pretty neat looking little jet fighter. You don't see too many high-wing jets with anhedral, and along with the La-15, this one really stands out. You only get one paint job, for the unpainted prototype, but really it's a pretty clean look and it's easy to decorate if that's your thing. Now, I rarely say this, but landing this jet can actually be a little difficult. There are 2 issues at play. The landing gear has a very nose-high profile, and the landing flaps generate an enormous amount of lift even at low speeds. This means that you have to land with a significant amount of pitching down. But with the nose gear being so long, it feels really awkward, and it isn't hard to find yourself riding your nose wheel down on the runway having trouble slowing down. Add to this that the brakes are pretty weak, and you get a jet with kinda rough landing performance. You can drop gear at around 450 kilometers an hour and landing flaps a little over 300, but it's a better idea to try and come in as slow as possible to reduce the landing run. The cockpit of the La-174 is excellent. You have great visibility in all directions, and the instruments are easy to spot. The reflex sight and the forward bracing can be kind of annoying, but it was easy to get used to, and overall, this jet has a pretty good cockpit for VR. To close out on the rare La-174. This jet has good engine power, it's strong in a dogfight, and it's reasonably fast for its BR. However, the guns are difficult to use effectively. It doesn't have a lot of ammo per gun, and it's a bit fragile. The final verdict on the La-174 is that this jet is pretty fun to fly, and it can be an effective dogfighter once you get a feel for its limitations. If you see it come up again as an event prize, it's worth checking out. As always, thanks for watching.